Today, we're just going to talk mission side, like what our office does. You probably know a little bit of this, but I'll go a little bit further into that. Strategies, and primarily that's even a setting of goals, like that kind of a process. Talk through some of the online resources that you might or might not know about. I mentioned some of them already, but we'll get into more detail. The funding piece, I mean, that's actually more a question about the fellowships office, but who's been pursuing funding?
Funding for, all right. While we're here at Yale.
Well, okay, so there's research funding, right? But I mean, actually, like, fellowship fundings for like summer independent projects or, stipend in order to cover the costs of having an internship and those kinds of things. So there's some other funding pools that you might want to take a look at as well. Anybody?
I think like one that we're familiar with is I guess for postdocs, there is a pool of funds that we can apply for to travel to conferences.
Exactly.
So one of them.
That's one of them.
Yeah.
So the postdoc is limited, right? I'm thinking more like the PhD and master's students have access to a couple of like Yale funding sources, like for summer experiences and those kinds of things. But I'll probably breeze through that one pretty quickly because I'm not sure how much of that is actually applicable. And then we'll come back around on an action plan for this. Won't kind of belabor the point on our mission. I'd again circle that last line. We support every stage of your career development. And actually, I probably bleed that over into what is a career. Our office provides resourcing for, I'm looking for a job in industry, which is kind of the obvious from our perspective. But like also the academic side that's a career. And it has all the same negotiating offers and wondering about, making comparisons between like different opportunities, the pacing of it, the timing, sometimes the funding, if there happens to be a fellowship or something like that involved. So just know that our office actually like is here to touch on a lot of those things, not just like, let's find you an internship or whatever. The component of that is kind of broken into two major categories: advising and exploration. And advising is the more standard, like it's things like this, like a workshop or the one-on-one advising that I mentioned. And I should talk a little bit about what that can be. It can be strategic, it's a one-on-one session, right? So it can actually be anything you need it to be. But it can also be things like material review or interview mock-up, version. The elements that you need to be prepped for a given interview, and you want someone to give you feed you those questions and be kind of dynamic in that sort of a a slightly heightened moment of interview. We're happy to do that. We do that all the time. We have some resources with that as well. Big Interview, Big Interview is the one where you can record your interview and see how to play back to you and see it. And also it will have some preloaded questions, but you can also load your own questions. So that's an additional resource. But advising in general is just like the way of actually sitting down either across the table or on a Zoom or whatever happens to be with our office. And then the exploration, though, is where we actually, usually it's some kind of that's the assignment. We'll meet, we'll talk about, where you're coming from, what you're looking at, and we'll probably send you off with both some additional resources and probably some additional, hey, this is what you should be doing in this direction. Hey, let's give you some, both some tools and some goals in terms of deepening your networks and picking up new relationships, things. We also have a couple of different things. Networking is going to come into any conversation with our office. That can mean a lot of different things, networking. And it mostly means relationship building of all stripes. So that includes peer version, what you're doing here at Yale, the people you're connecting with, both the faculty as well as supports and PIs and those sorts of things. What is the horizon of connections that you have in place, and then what's missing and how can we build out that a little bit further. And that is actually probably pretty interesting and important as you get into pivots into things like industry outside of the academy, because you probably don't have as many relationships set up those ways, and how can you set up some more of those. We'll probably come back around and talk a little bit more about that, or even any questions, we can talk more about networking approaches. The actual search, right? So strategically, it can be either passive or active. And that's part of the exploration, sure, and part of there's a materials review aspect of this of is your resume ready? Is your CV? You probably have CVs right now. You might not have resumes, or maybe you have both. How to use them and when to use them, that kind of a combination. In the industry space, having and making sure that you're actually using and expanding your use of the LinkedIn profile. It's more common within industry for that to actually be a place where people, if you're a specialist in a given field, if your research is kind of already hedging a step in the direction of industry, are you making sure that that's not just winding up on academic channels, but actually going into like LinkedIn articles about, hey, have you seen this? Or I read this, and like pulling people into identifying you as being a specialist, like at least in tangent to field. That's actually something that, is not commonly done in the academy, but is an important piece of kind of transitioning into a more industry-focused interest. Connections, again, that's just reinforcing the networking side. But the difference between passive and active, I suppose, like, and this is very industry-focused, right? Like, passive is like jobs boards. Like, you just put yourself out there, or the awareness of where you should be looking, or the kinds of, even something like the employer directory that has one step slightly more active to it, but it's still like you're using some kind of a resource, right? And from that resource, you're building an outreach, which is going to be about materials preparation and knowing the targeted employers, the institutions, the programs that you're after. The active search, like that takes us back to that relationship side, because in industry, and actually, I don't think this is that different. Like in the academy, my guess, not guess, and having spoken with enough people on the PhD side, it's a lot about who you're connecting with, how you're building those relationships, who's mentoring you, who's bringing you along. It's exactly the same. It's analog to what you would be doing on the industry side, because you're actually going to be applying for things potentially, but then in that application, you're normally like a good 80% of the landing spots are happening because of who has referred you or recommended or put in a good word or mentioned you through a channel or something along those lines. So not to triple reinforce, but like the networking is going to be a component of no matter what you're doing. So I'll ask me if, after we get through this, if you want to talk a little bit more about the systematizing angle on networking. That can be, it's about really using support systems to make sure you're being as efficient and as active and maintained as possible with your standing relationships. So I have that as a bullet on here, but we can talk a little bit more about that and maybe like individually mention some elements of it. Goal setting. This is bigger picture and kind of taking a step back and asking yourself, like, what are you really after? It's a little existential in that way, particularly when you're straddling already, right? Like if you've got one foot in the academy, one foot in the industry, trying to figure out why you would be making a pivot and what would be the gain, what would be the loss. All those sorts of things are things our office can help you like talk through and think through. But it's a good aspect of your approach should be kind of sitting down and actually going through that process of understanding what are all the things you're after, why are your goals, and where are they potentially. That can also be helpful in the shakedown of once you've identified, the pieces and whys involved in that, you probably come across more specific things like, all right, like I'm identifying that this is why I'm after this, but that also is telling me I don't actually have exactly the right skill set, or I'm missing this piece. And that can be a way of identifying that, okay, now progression and development between my goal and where I am right now, I can make a list of the things that I should be working on, the transitional kind of elements and going broader in those ways. That includes things like, do I need an experience, a gap experience? Do I need something that's helping me to learn new skills, to take on new possibilities, learn new languages and platforms, like those kinds of things. Geography is always a big piece of this. It is interesting, right? And I'm sure these are the same questions that get asked on the academic side, but maybe a little bit more focused. It's more common in academy to be kind of expecting to be moved around a lot and going from one thing to the next. That's just part of the course. In industry, it's a little bit different. That's one of the advantages you could say of industry. And in that sense, if you're thinking about making a transition into industry, it's normally nice to think about what major area, major metropolitan area, a hot zone in terms of a location that within commutable distance has a large frame, a large number of the kinds of engagements you'd be after. So that's an important question that maybe sometimes gets overlooked and could be helpful. It's also helpful in dividing your process, because if like, well, I'm thinking like I want something on the tech side, and that's probably going to lead me to maybe a Silicon Valley, but also a Boston and maybe a New York. all right, so I'll parse those out and take a look at them each individually and actually even be able to make a point of comparison of like, what am I finding in Boston that I'm not finding in Silicon Valley or vice versa. So anyway, geography comes into that in a lot of meaningful ways. And then, yeah, the goal setting, not to beat a dead horse, but like the relationship building is always going to be like part of these conversations. Some things that you can think about too, in terms of your goals, and again, I mean, a gap experience that could be part of the transition, establishing credentials. This is not academic credit that we would really be talking about in your case, but even the building of a portfolio of the kinds of projects you've been working on. The Academy does well, I think, with publication and papers and presentations and those kinds of things, but doesn't always think about things in the same sense of like an actual deliverable portfolio. Like, how can you actually take the projects you've worked on and develop those into like, here's my website or my online portfolio that's talking through soup to nuts, like where I came into this project, what I added, the impact that I had, all those sorts of things. Now, I know that's a little bit different depending upon exactly what you're coming from and what you're bringing with you, but it is something else to think about in terms of points of transition. And I mentioned that, you know, establishing the credentials, I actually kind of mentioned that in the way of like LinkedIn, but also like, okay, there's academic publication, but there's also like mainline industry publications, including LinkedIn and other sources. And how can you start your process of developing an inline, a place where people are coming to notice that you're making this interesting observation, commentary on popular articles that are out there as opposed to just academic articles. So that's another kind of process of credentialing that you can be thinking about. That's small, isn't it? Wow. Yeah. So yeah, these are just a shakedown of the resources. I mentioned the website. What does that have? Career communities. You can be using these right now. You don't have to set up appointments or anything like that. Just go to the website. There's Explore Careers. And that navigation gives you like sub-portals for all of these different divisions of industry communities that we've kind of set up and hopeful that different people are landing and taking advantage of. So, you know, there's each of them have sort of like a breakdown of what are the major industry trade publications, what are some of the major trade organizations that are worth checking in on. It will have things like additional external resources that you can check in on that are relevant to a given industry. So that's like the career communities that live there. Major tips and walkthroughs for things like CV to resume development, interview prep, like, you know, any of those kinds of skills. Is everyone using our calendar right now? Like just checking in on when we have events, that kind of thing, OCS events?
I get the emails as well.
Okay.
Which is helpful to know, yeah.
So the emails are better if you have customized your account. Have you guys?
I have not customized
Okay,
my
so,
calendar. I'm going by emails, yeah.
So do that. And well, okay. And I know you're probably talking about the GSAS newsletter.
Possibly. I mean, I thought it had a lot of stuff about career specific.
Yeah. So that's probably coming from Jacob's office.
Okay.
So that's good. You can, if you want, also sign up for the broader office, which is not, now the noise of it will be, it won't just be kind of, you know, grad school and PhD and that sort of related. You'll see a bunch of things with like internships and others that, so it's noisy, but it will give you access to like, oh wait, I see this company is coming to campus, and even if they're recruiting undergrads, I don't know, you know, maybe I can show up anyway and ask a few questions and like wait back the line and like ask like, hey, what about your PhD? Like that kind of thing. So just if you aren't on our website as well, and meaning like the broader version with all the events on that there and that sort of thing, just make sure that you kind of tag that on, because they're just slightly different, right? What's great about what Jacob puts out is it's a very specific and very geared towards this population. So totally should be a fundamental part of what you're doing. But you might find some additionals and other things that are coming through in terms of like the kinds of companies that are recruiting and coming to campus, whether or not they're checking the box to say it's for, you know, grad students, that kind of stuff. So the career link, I mentioned that up top as well. Now, what does that have on it? It's got the jobs board. So that's similarly, that jobs board is going to be useful as a lead, at least, if not like actual, like, but here's the position I'm applying for. It's as much, here's the kind of company that's posting something in our system, which oftentimes means there's actually a point of contact you can reach out to and connect with that company. So even if it's like for a term time undergraduate intern, like you now have a person to say, hey, what about, here's where I'm coming from. What would be the seasonality for? So there's a little bit of kind of networking even around. Now that's not networking in a relationship building side, but more like an actual transactional networking with a company. But the jobs board's there for that. I mentioned the employer directory that lives in our system has like 10,000 plus companies. Now that for sure should be in your process. As you're looking at a given industry, it's searchable. It's like 10, 11,000 different companies. So it's big, so you can go geographic with it. You can look at, you can earmark particular companies. I just want to see if that company's in the system. But you can also do things like industry in combination with keywords. And you can get like, you know, a dozen different companies and given this location in this interest with this keyword that have recruited at Yale. And again, it's not always like they cycle out in terms of the recruiters on there, but if there is still a recruiter listed, at least try and reach out and connect with that person and see like, hey, and what's interesting is sometimes there's even the recruiter that's listed on there might have left that company, but might be at a similar company. I've actually like anecdotally like had students who have worked, reached out and connected with a recruiter from a secondary company who, but like end up like with a great relationship and actually like, you know, find an opportunity through that direction. So it's good in a couple of ways and even kind of hidden and mysterious ways as well. You know about advising, or at least I mentioned that before. All of that's done through the Yale Career Link. They tend to be 30 or 45-minute sessions, though we also do quick questions, which that's something you have available as well, which you can, that's more like a straight transaction. Can you take a look at this resume real quick and give me, you know, that kind of advice? Anyone use that, the quick question resource? So just know it's there, like, and that can be a really great, and that one, what will sometimes happen this time of year, and you know, I'll blame the undergrads, like we do end up like getting overloaded with advising at this time of year. So like if you dropped in on our calendar and try to set up an advising appointment, it might be a few weeks before there's an available appointment. Whereas the quick questions are kind of built to be a little bit faster, and there might be one within a week or something like that, or hopefully the week of, I can't promise. But you know, so both of those things exist. Like I just need you to look at a quick document, or I just have this one quick question, can you help me with? Versus the actual sit down one-on-ones are intended to be deeper, kind of let's enrich this thing, let's go bigger with this, and you can even like have a series of those with an advisor. And I mentioned the events calendar, some of the resources we talked about already, that resume interview AI tool. So Big Interview both can be interview prep. It's also a way of putting your resume through their system to have it read by an ATS system, an AI reader. And it can give you like, at least like the basic version of like, hey, is this reading okay? Like that kind of thing. It's hit or miss, it's AI, it's getting better, but it's done a good enough job to at least key you in on an area, even if it's not telling you what to do with that area. It can let you know there's a problem there and you probably need to do something about it. So it's actually a great way, maybe even running like the Big Interview tool before you do like a standing one-on-one session with an advisor that's live, that kind of thing. How about Rocket Blocks? Anybody use that?
I actually don't know what that is.
So that so all of these resources live within kind of the broader purview of our office, but most of them will live within on Simplicity, you'll find a resource directory. I think it's called like the resource library. So it has listings for things like Big Interview, Rocket Blocks, Career Shift, Firsthand, Going Global, Traverse, like all of these that I'm listing here. Like I'll tell you just quickly what each of them are. We talked about the Big Interview. Rocket Blocks is for, it's okay, primarily it's for case prep if you're interested in consulting at all, but it's really good. It's pretty extensive in that direction. It does some technical prep. They're doing more, but I also don't want to overpromise. It's going to be primarily like case prep well, and by case prep, I don't just mean the case prep part. I mean the preparation for the kinds of interviews that that consulting tend to have, which is even like the quantitative interview or being quick with your numbers and guesstimation of problems, case problems to be dealt with like quantitatively. So it's a great resource, and that's available through our office. Career Shift is an external aggregator, which is a premium service that you have access to through our office while you're here. And it gives you, as an aggregator, it's sort of like a super career search. Like it does jobs, it does employers. You can build in like it has the infrastructure to build in a campaign of like, here are the kinds of companies I'm looking for, and here are my target companies, and here are the contacts for these companies. And it's a lot, to be honest. You know, you don't dive in and just know, like, work with it right away. There's a tutorial for it, but some of the things you can do immediately with it is, I know that these are the subcategories that I'm interested in, and I want to just find out, like, what are, you know, major jobs in this area, a little bit like our jobs board, except much bigger, in this area, in this industry, with this keyword, and it'll give you a pretty massive return. You almost even have to put filters in that are sort of like posted within the last 2 weeks or something like that. But it's a great way to kind of supplement your process with wherever else you're looking for jobs, like LinkedIn and Glassdoor, that kind of stuff. Indeed, but it's just another way to kind of supplement that. Firsthand has a series of Vault guides. So that's one of the primary resources there. It's a great industry breakdown of here's what this industry is. Here are the major companies. Here are some of the trade organizations that are necessary to be, know of or be familiar with. So Firsthand lives in our system. You can log into a premium account for us. And going global is through the library system, but you can use our portal to go through to it. Is also giving you, it's kind of, it's a major aggregator, but it's for international. So for experiences abroad, experiences overseas, including like guides and H1 kind of stuff, like in that direction. I want to work in this country, I have this, you know, that's my background. What would I need, and what would that process look like? It's helpful in those directions. There's also peer networking lists. Now you have both access to the grad school or the grad's version of that. So there's specific grad, and that's basically just a capture of what have surveyed grad students who have gone on and, you know, gotten jobs or gotten internships and those sorts of things. What were those companies? Who were they? And it's a bit of a networking push, right? Because it can give you a name, even if it's from a couple of years ago. You can look them up and say, hey, I see that you're at Lockheed. Like, what does that look like? Like, do you know anybody over there? Like that kind of thing. But you can also, by the way, use them as just a finder tool. Like, okay, it's a little bit like the employer directory. Like, they've hired a Yale, like within the last couple of years, like this company has. That company should be on my list now. And yeah, I'll network around and try to find, like, but maybe you'll find a different contact through LinkedIn. So you don't have to be bound just by the pure networking lists. And also I want to mention that in that direction, it's just as easy for you to be using that, not just for the grad student side, but also for the undergrads. Because if you're using the list to like find the kinds of companies that have hired Yalies in the past, you might as well look at the bigger lists that have like all the, you know, all the, like there's a lot more undergrads that have like taken jobs and been recruited. And so using those peer lists, both for the summer positions, even though that might not be what you're after, and the long-term, the larger engagement, that's a useful tool as well. And those are on the network. Funding, again, this is mostly to the funding office that you want to look at. This you know, card is on here more for the undergrads because it has things like the Summer Experience Award and that sort of thing. So this would only be a limited engagement. Though, if you haven't directly engaged with the funding office yet, you should. Just conversation. They have a number of, as I mentioned, you know, summer experience kind of funding opportunities that many of them are open to grad students. And you might already, by the way, be having those funneled through your departments and those kinds of things. So it's not, I'm not suggesting there's going to be like brand new stuff you haven't heard of, but it is that student grants database that lives at funding.yale.edu is a decent storehouse that is searchable, and it's got like 300 different grants on there, fund fellowships on there. And so, and many of them actually are open to grad students. Action plan, and this, you know, we might kind of skip this and turn this into more of you guys asking questions and stuff, because this is just like a going back through like all the stuff that we were just talking about. I did want to put on here, I mentioned STEM Connect, you guys know about them, and you know, some of the extras that they do and what they have going on. They put together career fairs, conferences. I mentioned that employer directory, like, you know, and that's like coming through our office, but can also be supported. And I would recommend, as you're engaging with our office, you probably want to be setting up meetings with our STEM team, because they're going to be closer to the material, just in terms of being aware of the kind of recruiting that's going on, the kind of companies that have either recently been through our office or might be planning, you know, a career fair like in the future. And then, yeah, and they have things like the STEM recruiting timeline, which kind of walks through a couple of industries are the kind of STEM related industries, and when the hiring is usually taking place. They also run their own. It's a supplemental newsletter. It's just a STEM Connect newsletter. And again, you should sign up for that even if you're already getting a decent amount of that through the GSAS side as well. Additional resources. I mentioned those career communities. There's a Life and Physical Sciences is one of the communities that you might want to check out. HPAP, that's for anyone who's actually, thinking about the health sectors, or is there carryover between what you're doing and in the health sectors. There is, you guys are already all over it, I'm sure, like the grad school section. Yeah. Campus CT, company career opportunities in Connecticut. That's an interesting one. You should probably check it out. Connecticut, it's a dual kind of venture with the state of Connecticut, Yale, and some other schools, where the intention is to build better pipelines for hiring directly from Yale into the Connecticut area. Which is not always thought of as being, the hotbed. If you make your short list of the places that you're thinking geographically, it might not be Connecticut. But, between the infusion within New Haven, but also Hartford and carryover between like Boston and New York, that's actually worth checking in on. Similarly, the sprints, the life science internships in Connecticut, worth checking in on that. That's a little bit more undergrad focused, but, you might at least take a look. And then, like, again, these are probably all things that you're already quite familiar with, but like things like the AIP, the APS are just really great resources. They're membership oriented, and you can usually while you're in school, you can have like a much reduced entry fee to any of those organizations. AAPM is more for physicists in medicine. Physics Today, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, is actually good too, because it actually has like, okay, it's a limited jobs board, and it's not, it's only what happens to you rolling through like that publication. But like, it's not bad to take a look at and see like what's trending and what's happening, what new companies are doing interesting things. I mean, a little bit less on the company side, like even labs and institutions and those sorts of things, such as pathwaytoscience.org is an interesting resource. I mentioned LinkedIn a couple times. There are great LinkedIn groups that you can become a part of, and that's a great way to build community and also become a little bit more established. And also how you find the people who are doing and really super active in those directions. And you can find someone like who's kind of filling a niche or role that's similar enough that it could be a good model, different enough that you can do your own thing to sort of say like, oh, I love like the posting, the strategy, how often they're coming up with their articles, how they're kind of like modeling, following the articles from Physics Today or whatever, like in order to like come in and like shadow like what people are talking about and put their 2 cents in. LinkedIn groups are just another way to kind of facilitate that. This one I found, I actually don't know a lot about it. Are you guys part of like the Yale Society of Physics Students?
I think it's mostly for undergrads as well.
Okay, that was what I was wondering.
This is something that, I mean, most institutes will have their own sort of chapter, because I mean, so I went to school in Texas, and in my undergrad there was an SPS which I was a part of, and then I was an advisor for where I went to graduate school in Houston. So they all have them, but
here is it just it's mostly undergrad here?
I think
everywhere.
I think it's for undergraduates, I believe.
Now, is there an equivalent? Is that like what would be is there an org that kind of you guys are doing this, right? Like so you might be the closest equivalent, but like, is there a comparable? I ask this more because it could be worthwhile. And I actually, to be honest, I actually don't even know how well organized like that undergraduate SPS is, but in partnership in, crossing the aisle in a certain way to like, there are employers who would be even more willing and interested to engage with Yale in general for the full spectrum, to know that we could be recruiting both with undergrads and PhD and postdoc and all that. And so, you might want to check in with SPS to see just, even if they are thinking of themselves primarily as undergrad, would they want to sit at the same table and talk about like initiatives to bring employers to campus to have these kind of conversations and stuff like that? Would your org be the right org to do that? Or is there a different org that would be better?
I mean, I would probably think that we would probably, it falls within the umbrella of what the organization would want to do, because I mean, I think the thing that might come closest to this, but still, I mean, from my side, I'm more aware of like postdoc orgs would be the YPA, which is just the postdoc association, but I don't think there's ever actually like melding between early career folks starting from, postdocs working our way down.
And in a way, this would be more kind of specific and nuanced, more granular in terms of like, I see undergrads are having the same questions and trying to get employed by the same kind of places that we're interested in, or even comparing notes and talking about what are your target employers that you're after. It could be worthwhile. Now, I'm always sensitive to overpromising because I don't actually know the SPS very well, and they might be really well put together, or they might be, limited in terms of like what they're doing. But even if it's filling a gap that even helps them and gives a co-channel that becomes like a better way to like reach out with, and I'll give you an example. Like if you were to do some kind of partnership with whatever the version of SPS that exists at Yale. And through that, you would identify like 3 or 4 employers that everyone's in agreement, like these are the ones that we're after, and they're not coming to Yale. What's going on with this? And then you come back to our office and you say, we've got multiple, both PhD and undergrad organizations that are clamoring to have these employers, come to Yale. Not only, I mean, that's not, our office would love to help no matter what, like if one student says, but like, when we can take that to those employers and say, we have multiple undergrad and PhD. So it's that kind of accumulation of interest. If you want to think about that, like that might be a way to build in some more infrastructure in terms of the organizations. Okay, I mentioned firsthand already, that's where the bulk guys live, career shift. There's some training components that live in our office. You can find them within those resources I mentioned, and you can also just look for them on our website, like for Forage, Prometheus. I mentioned Rocket Blocks already, so we won't do that again. But Forage and Prometheus are they're for like short, almost like micro internship kind of engagements, and it runs the spectrum. Some of them are actually like hands-on. We need help for this project for a couple of weeks. And the great thing about it is it's credentialed, right? Like you can put on your CV, your resume that like, you ended up, completing this project like for Forage or whatever. It's a lot of really great employers, including a lot of STEM-focused employers. Prometheus is the same thing, except it tends to be in the nonprofit world, as opposed to like, Forage's big industry, like big companies and stuff like that. But it's worth checking in on it, particularly if you're making a transition in the industry and you don't have a lot of like standing experience, or it's been a while since you've like had an internship in the industry. It could be a way to kind of cut the teeth again, to get familiar with it again, and also add something new and fresh to the resume, which suggests that like recently I had an engagement with IBM doing this thing for a 4-week whatever. So that's another resource that you can sort of think about. All right, so that lands us some questions, and then I'll just put this up as kind of a reminder for that STEM Connect and those other different resources. So yeah, what else would be helpful for us to talk about?
I have a question about networking.
Yeah.
Something that I somehow don't think enough about, but I know it's very important. Most of my like networking happens through just like organically with people I know, and I establish relationships. But sometimes, there'll be people who come to Yale and maybe they work in industry, and I meet them and we have a nice chat, but I have no way that I can think of maintaining a relationship. Yeah. And I don't know how to do, like, I also feel maybe slightly more uncomfortable reaching out to people that I hardly know. Yeah. But I feel like there must be a way, and maybe it's not so awkward. What would you say about that? So it will always be awkward. Okay, it's always going to be. I should say, like, everyone's wired differently. Some people love that, and it's not awkward. I'm of the category that's super awkward. But so if it's awkward now, it will still be awkward. Okay. So the support around it is sort of, I mentioned like systematizing the process. Yeah, yeah. That actually really helps. So a couple of different things. One, it's kind of about ownership and responsibility over what you begin to think of as a relationship. And that might feel like a stretch or a reach, like I barely know this person, I saw them at a conference or whatever. But like, you want to start categorizing these as even nascent relationships. And that means, so the system would be like building a spreadsheet would be a great way to start. That's really cold and sterile, but like it actually means I'm giving the respect that this is a relationship that's going to expand over time, and I need the room to be able to track and identify and do all those sorts of things. So one of the fundamentals of like a networking build is building the system, and that's normally like spreadsheet that's going to be categorical. It's going to be what industries, what regions, what schools do they go to, what projects they've been involved with, what employers have they been, involved with.
where they, in the case of if there is a transition and they're partially like academic, where they've been published, like any of those kinds of things is fair game as well. But what you end up doing though, in first pass on this list is not to add a bunch of new people and new targets and people. It's to actually like lean back into the strength of the organic networking you've already doing. And I say that because it's the friendly way to start. And it's also, in my experience, it always gives people a kind of a boost in confidence because we talk about networking and it seems like this distant, kind of egregious thing that we have to be involved in. But it's just a heightened version of the same organic networking that you've been doing. It's just, you have to find new channels and slightly, artificial is too hard of a term. It's not fully organic, versions of this. So the process looks something like, you sit down, you actually go through who are all the faculty previous, the PIs I've worked with, the different, I did have an internship from 5 years ago, or, way back when I was an undergrad, and that's a relationship. And even if it's from 5 years ago, like get it on the list because it will never get fresher than it is right now, right? Like the staleness can be observed and then it can hopefully be addressed. And so you're going to put all these people on the list, including family connections and all those sorts of things, and whether tapped or untapped, or like, hey, I had the uncle that mentioned that thing the one time. I kind of laughed at it, but you know what? Like, I should probably do something about that. Like you pull it all together into this center store list, and then you fill it out, and that's where you start kind of gauging, what do I need? Like, what do I really need to know about geography, location, like the companies, all those sorts of things. But here's the hinge point. That document should have an address, a date on it. Like it's a timestamp, right? Like a fresh by date, where you're saying like, this is either the last time I tried to connect with this person, or this was the last time I did connect. And that's where you get annotation. What did we talk about? What's my assignment? Like what homework did I have from that conversation? I met them at that conference. What were they talking about? What articles did they mention that I can make sure I read so that when I reach back out to them, I can talk about, hey, you mentioned this article, I read it. Can we talk about it more? Like that kind of thing. So that annotation is kind of like, that's additional, but the hinge is that date. Because once you have the name on the list, it's one thing, and then you have a date on the name, you now unavoidably have a ticking clock with that relationship where you should ping on a semi-regular, that's not weekly, that's not monthly, that's sort of like, you'll find like the right, but to start, like it is immediate, right? Like if you've gone to this, conference or something like that a couple of weeks ago, or again, if it's been years, it's fine, you can still do it. But like, you normally want to follow up like within a week of the conference in order to like have that initial conversation. And what the backup for that? One, again, the system will kind of project you in a certain way. Also, the system will give you the points of reference. So when it's you capture all these details, and now you have a data store where a keyword, a reference to a company, a reference to an individual, a reference to an alum from years ago, you throw it into your system and actually, wow, like 4 other people had referenced this company. And I would have forgot if I happened to like actually put them all in like together in this list. So it gives you a little bit more traction in terms of like, what do I reach out and connect with this person about? Like that one's easier though, right? Like they were at a conference. They're probably getting a lot of things because people who are doing kind of the good work of networking at a conference, taking names, making references and following up. So you're kind of in that pile. How can you distinguish or set yourself out is taking the good notes, making it really measured reference towards something that they maybe barely talked about, but like clearly felt something strongly about, or they talked about their project from 5 years ago, but that doesn't seem that applicable, but actually that's exactly in line with what you're researching right now. And so I should reach out and like mention that to them. Maybe they could be even like, not an advisor, but they could give some kind of like industry related context to the thesis I'm working on. Like that kind of thing, like would be possibilities. The consistency of it, because it's not always going to be a conference and I can follow up on a conference, or it could be 2 years after the conference and now what? It's also like a charged list that you should regularly, like on a probably monthly basis, be running your list and looking for identifiable misses or openings or that name, you're going through Physics Today or whatever else you're using, like a keyword searching for that company name or project to see if something happened, something new has come up. Keeping that track of the kinds of things that you can then use to continue to look for and research on in terms of points of reference. And so the activation is usually coming from one of two directions. It's either what's happening with them that I can research and stay abreast of, and so that I can reach out and make that connection and be one of a dozen people that actually took the time to say like, oh, I just saw that thing that you mentioned, like has gone to fruition. Like, I'd love to hear more about it. Or what's happening on your side. And that's, I mean, you're active in your own research and you've got all kinds of things that are going on. And that might be directly related to the kind of industry that you're after, or it might be tangential, but like it's still conversational and might have like a carryover in an interesting way. You will be going to another conference. So reaching out and connecting with people before you go to find out, are they going? Like that's a simple one, right? So there's a lot that can happen in that makes it a little bit less awkward because there's kind of like a standard channel to it. And it's almost just like you leave the engine idling and moving forward in those ways. And eventually something really like springs out. Like you check in and like, oh my goodness, they just got this huge grant to do this thing. I want to be one of the first people that's going to reach out and, you know, congratulate and ask if we can set up a quick chat, or if they're here, like we can grab a coffee, or if they're in New York, that I'll take a train down and do the thing. Like that's the kind of thing that you can supplement with. But I actually think it does all start from having a good, strong center store of like a spreadsheet of some kind, a database of some kind that you're comfortable with and use that.
Okay. Yeah,
does that help?
It does help. I think maybe being more organized. Like I have a lot of these thoughts in the back of my mind, like, oh, I met this person, they do something interesting, but maybe writing it down and being organized about it. So also I don't forget their names, or, you know,
it's for retaining, but it's also again for responsibility.
Yeah.
Like it gives you like the formality of actually having them on your list makes you responsible for that relationship in a way that we all avoid short of that. Like, and we all carry like the dozen different things, people we should reach out to and the conversation we should have.
Yeah.
But we don't tie it down because the moment we do, we're now actually responsible for it. And we're like aggressively ignoring it. Yeah. If it's on our list, right? If it's not on our list, we're busy. We've got 100 other things that we're doing. And obviously like that's always going to be in the back. It's a way to move that part of it a little bit closer to the front and a higher priority. And yeah, the responsibility kind of factor.
Okay. I like that. Thank you.
Are you going to follow up with the conference?
It wasn't a conference. It was somebody that came here to visit.
Okay.
So I'm thinking I'll probably, you know, try to reach out to them through LinkedIn first. They might come here again. They're working with my PI. And so maybe just like, you know, roll the ball with that. And then there's somebody else who I'm like, ah, yes, I met also here. And I think I can email them and then also do the LinkedIn and have questions to ask to this person. So
that's a good point. It all rolls together, right? Like that, the LinkedIn side where maybe you buff up a little bit. I'm going to post on LinkedIn every once in a while.
Right.
Many people don't.
Yeah, I don't post anything too much anywhere, but I think it is good. And then also like obviously what they're up to. And I think that's maybe a good way to at least professionally, you know, have an idea of what somebody's working on.
And even be, you know, they're working on something, you see an obscure article and you know, ping them on LinkedIn, and that's a way to draw it together. And then maybe they start noticing that you are occasionally posting an article about, hey, read the article, wanted to make a mention of, isn't this exciting? This actually bears directly into my work, like that kind of thing. So it's, none of it is, you know, none of these are islands, like they're all definitely like, you know, working together. So any of these resources, including like the networking side, is going to be in conversation with like, well, can you improve your LinkedIn engagement? Can you show the industry, which is all LinkedIn, right? All the industry, like that's a pretty primary place for a lot of professionals, that you are transitioning in this way, and that you're thinking in terms of like how my research might bear upon this given industry. Like you want to be the person who's like identifying that, making commentary on other people who are identifying that. You want to be in that group that I don't even know what LinkedIn group it is, but like you'll find it, and you want to like be in that membership and you know, keying in on each other's, you know, observations. All of that will actually fold over into new leads and links and ideas of people to accumulate and pull into your network. It will also be that networking phase never ends, right? Like it's not really a phase. Like you have a kind of a loading phase on the network where when you're being systematized about it, where you're pulling and making sure that all the good work you've already done organically is actually, you know, being brought in and given recognition. But you know, it's just like a warm channel that you are constantly like feeding, engaging, and and looking for like excuses, right? And that goes back to the idea of when things happen on your side. You can almost think of it as like branding or marketing. Like, you are your own company, like, and so your research needs marketed, and you need to be able to both put together the pitch for why you as a specialist in this domain would be such a great commodity for like a given employer, but you also need to be able to think through how that pitch is not just in a like a job interview kind of way, but rather in a communal like, hey, you're that person that I keep seeing the articles that like really are keying directly into what we're asking in our company. Can we set up a conversation? I'd love to, hear more about your thoughts. Like that could easily lead to like some kind of freelance consulting gig with an organization that then maybe becomes a staff position down the road or something like that. So it all kind of works together in a way. Other questions?
You're also free to introduce yourself, since you want to. So no, it's okay.
I got lost and I just came from another event.
Sure.
But I'm visiting PhD in film, which is sort of
fantastic.
My interest in as well. So I mean, for me, it's just more so more personal connections with.
Yeah. The film side, I mean, less STEMmy, right? Like that's more my background, right?
I did some work in sort of sustainability in film as well, and sustainability consulting in that area. But so film.
So focus documentary or narrative?
No, more so kind of fiction.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So and feature shorts?
Yeah, kind of juggling between both.
Okay. And mostly theory based?
Yeah, mostly like my PhD work is mostly theory based.
Okay.
Again, I'd love to hear more kind of about kind of the industry side.
Yeah.
Which might be thematically a bit different.
So in that category, I mentioned our office broadly, like we're all generalists, and so I'm here from the capacity of like, hey, our office is a great resource that you definitely should be using. And there's a lot of transfer that happens there. But I'm the director for creative careers, common good and creative careers. So at some point, you should probably set up an appointment with me, like, and we can do a deeper dive in terms of your background, the kinds of things that you're looking for. The critical side, right? Like a lot of transfer would be cultural critique, but also thinking through on the research side of things in development and working with film production companies and those kind of things. Those are all possibilities in terms of that transfer. Publishing world too. I mean, critique can be specific, like freelance, but it can also be within the editorial side and working with like Film Nation and like the different things that are out there, that kind of thing. Yeah, actually, I should. Let's do that. Let's go around and say who. What are you guys working on? Like, what's your background?
We can start on this side and work our way up.
I'm a postdoc in the physics department. I work in experimental quantum stuff.
Okay. Yeah, so the new build is all that's in your direction, like all the new.
Yeah, but I don't know if it'll be built during my postdoc.
What year are you?
I just started.
Oh, so you got an outside shot then. They're talking about some of it being done in like 7.
Oh, really?
So.
Okay. They always say this stuff, but it takes forever, I think.
Yeah, it feels like when Yale gets serious about something, they do it. Like,
I mean, this ramped up from, when I was out of town, came back, and then there used to be like a jagged staircase that I always kind of wanted to rail down on.
Yeah.
It was gone, and then that's it. My dream's gone.
No more. You never had a chance. But no, but I mean, that's your world, right? But like, I do think that those resources will probably be popping up in the next 4 or 5 years.
I'm Molly. I am a PhD student here in my 4th year, so I am looking kind of ahead more now to what do I do next, and I feel like I should take more advantage of what Yale has to offer.
Yeah.
I work on a large scale neutrino project. I'm also working on like some smaller scale experiments. I actually come from the art world, so I used to work
Fantastic.
In the arts in New York and other places. And I was also interested, I'm not sure if you know, but like, have you seen jobs that are like a synthesis of STEM and something that's maybe more creative?
Collections, like it's sort of like Peabody world, but also like that kind of thing.
Okay.
That's probably like the most immediate kind of a version of where that crossover happens. Also though, and you might have been, were you in the gallery world or the auction world?
I was in the gallery world, yeah.
So yeah, so that conservation, right? Like, is probably like the primary crossover within those worlds? Was that what you were doing?
No, it's not what I was doing, but you know what? I made a career change and it was for a reason, and I do want to stick in physics. And I was like, maybe there's something that I can blend parts of myself, but
no worries.
I have other ways to blend.
Yeah. But if you wanted to.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so can I just
Yeah.
I have like a friend of a friend who's a dancer and a physics PhD.
Okay.
And she's giving a talk soon about like combining science and the arts.
Oh, nice.
Theater, so
yeah. Yes, please give me the
into
information. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'm forgetting the name of the professor, but someone who does physics of dance.
Yeah.
And she works with the Yale Dance Collective and stuff. So yeah, that's actually an interesting crossover.
I think she did some work here. There's some film.
Yeah.
It's Sarah Demers, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's been doing great work in that direction. So I mean, there's going to be like that kind of patchy kind of crossover in interesting ways. Other than conservation, which I think is kind of a pretty direct version. You could also think in terms of, well, I mean, it's necessarily just conservation, but like outside of like the galleries, the auction houses, which because there's okay that
no I think like, I made a I have done so much now. No way that I'm going back. I was just kind of I'm open to many possibilities. I like to kind of see and I think my imagination it's not small, but it's limited. It's always nice to talk to other people to see like what other possibilities exist. But
I mean, we can leave this off. But, the last thing I'd say is so that conservation angle, could be a way of bringing all of this work that you've done in the last X number of years back to a place that you're familiar with and like have some gains. And I just say it because like I'll make this more general. Like one of the questions that you usually want to think about when you're thinking like, well, I'm as a PhD or postdoc, like you're a specialist, right? Like you've gone super deep in your field. You're an expert in one that one hope could be consulting or hireable, like in any number of capacities for different industries that would like to have that specialty. But there's an advantage when you can have that and also say, I'm familiar with your world. Right. So there might be reasons like you have no interest in that, but just generally, when you can say like, not only have I taken this specialty to this level on the technical side, but like I had this other job or I interned with, or I as an undergrad, I was, my senior thesis was on, like those are sorts of things that can kind of gap in and make it a little bit more approachable in terms of like, not this alien, or let's say unicorn creature of specialty, but rather like, okay, great, we need that, but we want to be able to talk about this stuff and you know what we're really after, and you know about our industry and that kind of thing. So you have a built-in potential there, but more generally, that's just something that you can kind of be thinking about as you're looking at like spillover and pivots into these industries.
Could I ask you a follow-up question about your job? So you said that you're in charge of creating common good careers. So what's kind of common good?
Yeah, common good is impact driven. It's everything from government, education, nonprofit, public service, like any of those kinds of things. So yeah, like government positions and those sorts of, there is definitely, potential spillovers in terms of like consulting opportunities and think tanks and those sorts of things. Live like in some, not all of it, but like a decent amount of it lives within the common good sphere.
Okay. Yeah. And then do you feel like there are opportunities for people from STEM backgrounds, like quantitative researchers, data scientists, that kind of thing?
Well, certainly. I mean, like, the ease of transition into industry probably in the last 10 years has sort of been, data sciences. So I mean, every industry like has a version of, we need someone who can analyze our data and help us with that. And one of the great gains of like probably any PhD is like dealing with a lot of research data, analyzing it, and doing something with it, like making it reportable and deliverable. So even if you're not like quote unquote a data scientist, like you probably still do have a lot of the skills that are mineable and serviceable like in those directions. So that is certainly like kind of a lever point that could be used. Where you go between that and whatever industry you're looking at would be putting some of those skills to usage in whether it's on a speculative level or doing some pro bono or getting paid a little bit to do a freelancing version, a consulting version, so you can build up a portfolio of demonstrating, not just look at all my academic research I've done, and if you cross your eyes, that looks a lot like what you're asking for. That's where you start, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what you eventually take it to is, here's my portfolio of putting those skills to work, and here's where I did the, analysis of streaming television or, whatever, like, for the shows that I've been researching or for the film history or whatever. Like, you do that and you extrapolate something that's actually digestible on their terms. So they don't have to look at it sideways to try to pretend like it is. I mean, it is, you've got the skills and you can do it, but you actually have to put it through the paces and try it on. And that's either finding some kind of fellowship summer or something that you can get funded to make that a project that actually becomes part of your portfolio, or again, pro bono, freelancing, or nonprofit for whatever, or getting paid or a consulting gig to do something like that, which can then be used as proof of concept for you to then pitch yourself towards an organization that kind of needs to see that it's one step closer to their reality. But yeah, absolutely, there's a lot of transferability there.
Dallas, I'm a postdoc. I do nuclear physics here. I'm pretty committed to staying in academia at this point.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, well, that's a career too. So I mean, I just kind of started with that, but it's true. Like, one, our office, we didn't used to, by the way, but our office, Hanja and Jacob actually do academic related, academia sort of advising as well. So that's a resource that you can take advantage of. And thinking about it, because not always within academia, some of the same elements that are there and directly in conversation with things like, what are my goals and where are my next steps and who should I be engaging with, and do I want to make a transition outside of this particular category and into the other, and how does that look? Do I want to have a foot in both fields, right? Like in both worlds. Those are things that our office can help with as well. So that, yeah, it's not just a conversion into industry. It can also be like, I want to do the best version I can and negotiate my the next offer from my department, like at the highest level, or just know your qualities as best you can, and get, your CV as polished as it needs to be. Like, all those are all things. You mentioned, but give us a little bit more about your background.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a second year visiting film PhD. My home institution's back. Yeah, so my main research is film theory, mostly in film philosophy, but I've done some work in, kind of industry work and sustainability and film production and something outside that research. So yeah, just trying to navigate both.
Yeah. What's your focus in film?
My research is sort of it's contemporary science fiction cinema, so it's post-humanist philosophy, aesthetics, technology.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like a hotbed too, just in terms of being it spill over into like popular culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, if you were like, French New Wave and
right.
How cool is that? But I mean, half of what's coming out nowadays, like, is at least in conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that lends itself well to,
That's great. Yeah. I did my undergrad in film at Yale many moons ago, but yeah, Yale's film department's fantastic. On that theoretical. They're not, they've never wanted or needed to be like on the production and industry side. I think there's been bursts in those directions, but you have access to, I don't know if you're interested in kind of like writing, screenwriting and those kinds of things, but you have access to the undergraduate courses that are actually technically in the English department, but they're film related. Like Derek Green and Aaron Tracy and Neil Thompson, those are all faculty members who are active professional writers in industry, which even if you're just dabbling and interested in a broader sense, taking those, if you can get into those courses, they're highly applied. But if you can get into those courses, those are great people to even have conversations with, like, you know, Aaron Tracy runs like, you know, TV writers' rooms and stuff like that. You know, so just conversation to hear more about what's happening in those directions, and where's someone from your background might be able to slot something like that in.
So I'm Fernando. I'm currently on my 3rd year as a postdoc. I work here in this building. I guess my specialty is in relativistic heavy ions. Our experiment is too big to be here, and it's like in Long Island.
Oh wow. Yeah.
I mean, I currently, as it stands, you know, just obviously I'm kind of committed to being in academia.
Yeah.
But since it's my first postdoc and I'm getting toward the tail end, you know, you start looking for, you start tilting towards anything that comes your way simply because, I think it's normal to just look what things are happening laterally, etc. But I myself also, I mean, while I am professionally a scientist, I have always had an interest in sort of this merging phenomena between science and art, or even like between science and I guess science communication.
Yeah.
And like how to express the science through different media than the one that we get used to being mostly just academic papers, but like actually, you know, through film, maybe through even things for younger audiences. Like I've always thought about how cool it was to write like a physics book that is kind of technical, but it's written in the style of, say, like a graphic novel, or like a comic book, or these types of things. So, and then luckily, you know, at the school, we so many resources as we can tell, but then there's also a lot of like crossing between things that you wouldn't even think would come our way. But there was this data as art competition, not competition, but event that is hosted through Memorial Cushing Library.
Okay, yeah.
Where in principle, it's an open call for basically people who are scientists that have robust data sets and have, you know, in their spare time realized that there might be like a nicely artistic way that I can plot this.
That sounds like procrastination.
Yeah, exactly. So not as a, you know, cheeky plug, but right now there is something that I produced that's in the rotunda at the Memorial Cushing Library, and it's data from a PhD thesis that I was like, my boss told me, you're kind of artistic, see if you can do something. So then in my spare time, instead of working, I basically plotted something that I've plotted millions of times and shown millions of times at conferences, but I plotted in a non-traditional way that made it look completely different for even myself, and then showing it to, say, like my brother or my mom, and they're like, oh, that's so cool. Like, who made that? I was like, Mom, like, you've seen this, but when I wrote it in the paper, he's like, "Oh, looks a lot more interesting."
That's great.
Yeah. So I mean, it's nice to see that.
How long is that up?
I think it's up until next year. So yeah, it runs. I mean, it's only been up for a month, and I think it runs till the end of the school year. So maybe next May.
Okay.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and then there's. I mean, mine turned out to be this slow, but then there are these amazing, like, huge, like, murals that folks in like biology made, and they're covering the entire rotunda. It's actually quite nice to see how the data can be expressed in different ways. That, me personally, looking at these things was sort of like I had these emotions that I get when I go to like a museum, and then I realized, like, oh, I'm looking at like scientific data just being shown in an
It reminds me of a little bit of, I mean, if you think about like the monasteries transcribing all the old learning and how they eventually flowered into art, and having like illuminated pages and those kinds of things. It's sort of something that like they probably, you know, written the same words like 1,000 times before, but like suddenly it turns into a flower or something. Like it has that same kind of, like, it can be more.
Yeah, exactly.
Just important for what it is, but it can be something else as well.
Right. Yes, it's been quite interesting. And then also something that I've noticed as I have, you know, matured more as like a science. I mean, we always have to present stuff, but I do see that me and then people that I work with, we do spend a lot of time not necessarily doing, let's say, the physics, but it becomes a little bit more of like graphic design type of like work, especially for like generating a poster. We do spend a decent amount of time thinking like how to actually use this space in the best way possible, such that when people look at it, their eyes go directly to this, and then it allows for them to, because I mean, you realize, people tend to listen better or read more, I guess, effectively if what they're looking at is nice to look at.
Yeah, no, that's like a great point, like just the transferability of that skill.
Exactly.
That you all do, like, every time like you give a paper, give a presentation, give a poster. Also, I mean, not to, overpress like the consulting aspect, right? But like that idea of like building presentation and being good and efficient and knowing like the right approach and how to take the right pieces of data and put it in front of the audience, even an audience unfamiliar with the overall material. That's a skill,
right?
Like and something else that can transfer.